amount of money towards a property had she bought one in her earlier 20s. But she also understands that she wanted to live in a certain type of property. And now in your later 20s, you're able to enjoy the kind of property you would have liked. It's not her dream home, but the thing about a dream home is that it's something we also work towards. We can easily end up living in our ultimate sort of top billing-esque dream home later on in our lives. And in different decades, that dream home looks different. So we can start off with a one-bed, top floor unit and work our way to a cluster and ultimately sort of have your own big house or whatever way it looks like. And of course, one of the things that I didn't do, and I realized as Karabo was saying how we know each other, was to intro our different guests. So Karabo Nzweng, of course, is radio and a TV host. As she said, we know each other from Voice of Wits, and I've also followed your career, Karabo, and you've done exceptionally well through the years as you moved, as we left Wits and of course went on to be career women. And I think your career is also one that I'm always watching and really love seeing the different progress, especially because we know each other from VOW days. I now want to bring in our next speaker. I won't bring in another VOW person because there's somebody else I also know from VOW, but I want to bring in our next speaker, David Shabalala, who's the digital illustrator, creative director extraordinaire. I always say David is a person that you want to have on your project when you're working on something that needs some or other digital anything. And I mean, I've worked with him on a couple of projects, solo projects, but also when I was, working in different media companies. That's how much I sort of love and believe in the work that is done. Many of us know him from the different incredible illustrations that he does, and we share and reshare it across our own platforms. And I'm going to bring him on to reflect a little bit on his home ownership journey. David, I know we first sort of started this before you bought, but I'm going to bring in myself.
Hi everyone. So like Zama said, I'm a graphic designer and illustrator. I freelance a bit for a few agencies. My journey was my property journey was very rushed in a sense. At the time I was renting with a friend for like 5 years. We're just staying at a 2-bedroom in Randburg in Blackari. And this one day he feels like he wants to move out now. He wants his own space. Now this is after 5 years of sharing with someone, and he's telling me 3 months. I think 3 months in advance before the lease sort of lapses to be renewed. And I was like, crap! I'm not gonna rent again. I need to actually find a place. Now I've been privileged enough to also just have a business partner with my former company Sukechi Branding and Design. Sarah Jane Borden. So she had 2 other properties, and she was always encouraging me, just with the money we make from the business, with the profit sharing, with the bonuses we get, etc. She was always just encouraging me to sort of save towards one day having a house or buying property. So by the time my roommate at the time was moving out, I was already like, okay, I think I'm ready to actually find a place now. But it felt like I just needed that 3 months sort of deadline because it was around about October, and by Jan 2020 I was like, I need to be in my own place. So it was rushed in a sense, but I think I was fortunate to have someone with that experience of ownership to sort of guide me in sort of looking for the right area in terms of my career, in terms of being close to business opportunities. And I found a really cool place in the north. In North Riding, and I think I probably viewed around about 3 or 4 places, and I fell in love with it because it was so lush and green, and it just felt very not like any other complex, which is very sort of concrete, cement, very not homey. So I fell in love with the aesthetic of where I'm staying, but I think the more I sort of experienced my place, the more the faults, if I could call them that, started showing. The more the cracks started showing, in a sense. I remember like 4 weeks in where I'm staying right now, the caretaker comes and he says the previous owner, he's been sort of avoiding a few repairs. So the balcony was leaking. Every time it rains, the guy under me, so it's like 2 floors, I'm like the top floor. The guy under me would always have sort of leaks into his place, from the shower and from the balcony. So the previous owner, I'm assuming it's one of the reasons he was just selling, just because the repair costs and just all the things that selling like showed up. He probably wasn't willing just to sort of pay for it anymore. So now these problems ended up being my problems. So the previous owner who hasn't sort of disclosed the problems, they were now my problems, because obviously I'd now sort of bought the place. And obviously the agent didn't really like disclose this. I'm guessing this is probably like the norm. If they want to just sell a place, they don't have to sort of disclose everything. It's a bit unethical, but yeah. So on top of the transfer fees and the lawyer fees, the huge deposit, yeah, I had to just make way with at least 50, 60K in just repairing the leaks and the electrical faults in my place. So this place that looked like my dream, well, I suppose, yeah, my dream first sort of property was becoming a sort of nightmare. And almost something, embarrassing to say with everyone, but yeah, I mean, at 60K, I was really also just to get a proper, like, semi-dream car as well, and I had to just sort of adult through it and fix my place. So I suppose for me, that was such a huge lesson, like, don't just fall in love with how it looks like outside. Just sort of ask how everything works. Because even though the electricity compliance sort of certificate that the previous owner would sign that everything's okay, obviously they'll say everything's okay, you sign, you're like, oh, great. But now, once you're in the place, you just find these faults. And now all of a sudden, there's no landlord to sort of cry to. You are the one who's responsible for these repairs. And yeah, so I think, yeah, my experiences was very sort of just 2 months in already. It was just like, yeah, money I could have paid into the bond was just going to now just fixing up the place. Stuff I didn't want to fix, I couldn't buy the furniture I wanted. I couldn't buy, proper appliances. I just had to sort of make sure the place is sort of intact. Yeah, so my experience was quite sort of, not very good at the beginning. And suppose it's literally a lesson for anyone looking, just to sort of inquire, perhaps, the neighbors at the place that you want to stay at, like the people who stay at the complex, just to ask around, what problems there are. If you can, maybe perhaps the caretaker, he probably knows problems with almost every unit, stuff like that. My experience was a nightmare at first, but I think you tend to fall in love with your space over time. And once those financial sort of issues are over, you literally make the house a home. So yeah, that was my journey. Well, that's my journey so far.
So much for sharing David. Just quickly introduce yourself because I'm just sharing feedback. There we go. Thank you so much for sharing, David. I think I remember the initial stages, even before you got that place and the conversations that we're having. And then ultimately, of course, you made the decision to get that specific place. And I think a few things from your experience that started off essentially like a nightmare, right? So you get the place that for you is the place of your dreams just based on viewing it and the aesthetic of the place, and only soon to realize the various faults that you find. And I think the first key thing is when you view a property, make sure that you view it more than once. As Katin is saying, a lot of us will view a property, and I've done this before. I think with the first 2 properties that I bought, I viewed it once and I think made offers while I was on a hospital bed, which is probably what was one of the most dangerous things I could have done. but you want to make sure that you view your property on more than one occasion. The first time is the time when you fall in love with it and you realize that, okay, this is, I like this aesthetic. I like, the different amenities in that particular complex. And then the second and potentially even the third time that you view is when you're also able to ask perhaps the neighbors a little bit about, the place, how they're finding it, ask security, ask the caretaker, and now you're going at a different time. So if you had gone, let's say, on a Saturday during the day or on a Sunday during the day, so we are, during the week, or you get a sense of what the property or that complex is like on a Monday morning, because you're then able to see, there's actually quite a lot of traffic every time, or every weekend it's yibesh like here, and that's not the kind of lifestyle that I want to, or kind of complex that I want to live in. So going multiple times is very helpful. And I think, David, to speak to the faults that you found, it's actually so unfortunate that A, you found those kinds of faults, and B, that you paid for them, because those are faults that firstly, you wouldn't pay for when you live in a section. Well, typically, you wouldn't pay for when you live in a sectional title community, especially the outside bit. I mean, outside areas typically get dealt with, by the body corporate, and those fixtures, they have to make it. They have to essentially address them. And I think oftentimes when you find fault in a property and it wasn't disclosed, so you made a comment about, the agent didn't disclose this, and you're not sure whether it's, the status quo, or they were just wanting to be, or they were being unethical. So the thing is, they're actually required to legally disclose any issues with a property. And in the event where you found that something wasn't disclosed, I forget now what the time frame is, but you are able to raise it, especially because we know that there's certain kind of damage that would have happened over time, as opposed to ungena kuyindlu and you're like, oh, gumoshege, like let's say a cupboard, and they would argue, well, you could have damaged that cupboard. When we look at issues like damp, for instance, damp in a week or in 2 weeks, often the extent of the damp, and they're able to assess it. They'll tell you what this has actually been happening for the past couple of months or the past couple of years, and so they'd be able to be liable for those kinds of damages. And I think those are some of the things that when we're buying a property, especially for the first time, we don't even know to look at the disclosure section of an offer to purchase to see if there's anything disclosed. And then when we view the property, to be like, I'm seeing these things and I want them to be on the offer to purchase. And these things can be damp wall. These things can be, a crack. And some cracks are relatively normal. It's not a structural damage, especially in new developments where the cement kind of has to settle. You would find those cracks and it's nothing faulty per se. And I think the more we kind of certainly have these conversations and get a sense of what we should be looking out for and ask the estate agent, and if siyazibona, then they should be disclosed. And if anything, they're also able to help you better negotiate a price. Because had you known about all these costs, especially the fact that you had to deal with them yourself, you could have made, a lower offer as opposed to foregoing, a dream car or whatever the other things that you could have done with that money. And of course, we are having a great conversation with some fellow young professionals. We're talking about things that we wish we knew before we bought our first properties. So David Chabalala, Dr. Sibuyile Madikana, as well as Unomfundo. Unomfundo, I'm going to bring you in. I want to say something about Unomfundo. Unomfundo is actually the reason why I started sharing more about my property journey on social media. Her and I initially know each other from social media, and I think it was 2 or 3 years back, there was a tweet by somebody who had asked, people who've bought your properties before 30, what would you like to share about your property journey? Can you just give us some insight? And she tagged me in that, and I wrote a thread about my own property experience and the things that I'd kind of learned along the way and things that you should watch out for. Until that time, I was deliberately not talking social media. Talking property much on social media. And so I think we all have Nomfundo to thank for tagging me on that post and just nudging me to publicly share some of the lessons that I kind of picked up. I was already doing different related property work for some of my businesses, and started getting more deliberate with also sharing that insight on social media. So, Nomfundo, I'm going to bring you in. You bought into a new development and the Yindlu, and I know that also has had its own set of different challenges and also experiences. If you could also just share a bit about your home ownership journey with us.
Hi everyone. As mentioned, my name is Nomfundo, and I own a low-cost standalone house in a new development in a new area. Okay, so all those factors have different implications. So the fact that it's a low-cost house means I didn't pay what would other people would assume would be like a market rate for a house of that, like the size of my house. And also I didn't get to view it as Uzama has recommended once or twice. I basically bought the base level house off plan. And yeah, that's how I became a homeowner. And I wish as an accountant, I should actually say I spent lots of time crunching the numbers on Excel, and I decided this was the perfect house and the perfect price, but I actually didn't. My home purchase was strictly emotional. I was living in a Midrand, surprisingly, and I had a roommate, and I decided I'm tired of doing this thing. I don't want to share my space with people anymore. And I looked at what I could afford at the time, and I was still a trainee, and my house was it. So because it's a new development, it comes with its own issues. So for the first thing, selecting the house that you want, you have to know the exact square meters that you would like to have. So they have different options, and you choose the one that you want. And it's being low cost means basically the criteria that they were when I bought my house, it was aimed at people who earned between 16 and 21,000 rand. But then when you get the house, you really get what you pay for, because it's a shell. There's nothing in there. Things that you've never thought you need to put it into your house, like burglar bars. I had never ever considered that as something that you need to put into a house, because every house I had lived in had those things as a standard. So you need to put in your burglar bars, your cupboards, your tiles, everything you do yourself. And yeah, that was basically my home journey. Don't know what else, Zama, did you ask?
I think your story is interesting to me, because we know the past couple of weeks we've spoken about new developments, but obviously that was in the context also of a sectional title community. This is slightly different, and I think understanding then how it looks like when it's a new development that's not in a sectional title community, and this concept of getting a shell, right, and needing to do things to it. Because I think when we buy in a new development, the almost automatic assumption is Ntenga Indlu is a new development. Izoza iphelele thatha nje IKEA, and the only thing that I'm basically adding is obviously then my furniture. And I'm keen to hear from you whether it was communicated upfront, so before you signed, Uguti, listen, you're actually going to get Indlu in its most basic sense, and all these other things are not going to be included, or it was packaged in such a way where that actually wasn't as overt, and perhaps it's also just from a marketing perspective, but it wasn't something abayisho from the get-go, and then you realize obviously once you took occupation.
Well, I guess it was assumed knowledge, because I wasn't really careful when I didn't really consider all the factors when I bought my house. I'll definitely say this as a disclaimer, and it could have ended really badly, but luckily it didn't. So that people just assumed that you would know that you would get a shower, because even when after I was taking occupation, I came to the area to come get the keys and so on, and I would see my neighbors already putting their walls up, doing putting in their gates, everything. And I was just oh, okay, people knew that this was a thing. But for me, it was a shocker. I was oh my God, what's going on? Where are the tiles? So it was definitely a learning moment for me. And had I known that that was what I was going to get, I would have applied for a bond higher than the purchase price, so that I could finance all the things that have a similar useful life to the house. So, for example, the walls, the tiles, the cupboards, that I could have used, like, I didn't need to use like my own cash flow wise. It would have been better for me to capitalize that to the cost of the house.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned something that I know many people may not be aware of, and it's a great, I'll call it tool that you are able to access, and that is applying for a bond that is higher than the purchase price. And there are different reasons why we do that, right? So when you apply for a bond that's higher than the purchase price, suppose your house or apartment, the property that you want to buy is $500,000, and the property is able to be valued at, and the market would also agree that actually it can go for, let's make it 700,000. So that's an extra 200K. You actually qualify for 700 plus K, because that's actually a very big thing. You still have to qualify for this amount. And you make the offer, it's for $500,000. When you then go and apply for the bond facility with the financial institution, you're able to, as the conveyancers even work on it, you're able to get a 700K sort of bond facility, and you can use it sort of in one of two ways. And the bond would be registered for that 700K. The 500 would go towards the sale. The 200 at the deeds office, it gets registered at 700K as the bond amount over that bond. Where now with the financial institution, you're able to either have that 200K sort of sit in the access bond facility, so moifuna like right there and then you're able to have it, or abangi they leave it, so you don't ask it to be put in the access bond facility, and you want to be able to access it at a later stage. The only downside with the later stage is that you would need, the bank will sort of re-qualify you, so to speak, to make sure that you can afford the new payment, even though the bond amount is 700K at the deeds office. And I think the very big thing with that is when the property is priced right, and I've seen quite a number of properties currently that get priced right, is because people are just pricing incorrectly. You're able to do that. You still need to qualify. That's a really big thing. And in the event where you go for the excess bond, option, you need to be able to make sure that you're able to pay the 700K worth of the installment. So you still need to be able to honor the payment, because the bank is going to require that. So I think that's a really big thing, and a really great way to also just access equity into a property. So when we talk about property potentially being, a wealth builder, and it isn't always the case, but certainly potentially being a wealth builder, those are one of the ways that you can go about it, and there are interesting ways to play around it sometimes. And I mean, I was even having this conversation with Nomfundo earlier today, with some of the earlier properties, I wish I had done this because I bought low enough. I am really great at negotiating prices well, and so bought really well, and now could have had quite a significant amount of equity without having to go to the bank again to get a higher bond, and then having to pay, of course, bond registration attorneys. And so I think that's a thing you're able to do if you want to be able to have that kind of access to capital, and you can leave it in the bond facility and not touch it. But you have to be disciplined. I think that's the very big thing. And of course, do continue using the hashtag Property with Zama this evening as we're looking at what we wish we knew before buying our first property. Earlier on, we heard from Okarabo Nzweng, who bought her first home after many years of working. She had been working for, I think, over 2 decades, bought it with her partner. And I think one of the big things for her was she wanted to be able to enjoy her money in her early 20s. And of course, taking on a bond facility is quite a big responsibility. So I enjoyed the fact that she had money that she didn't want to use on this and was willing to wait, and so only bought that first property later on in her 20s. David Shabalala earlier was sharing how he found this property that looked like a dream, amazing aesthetic, and everything went well until shortly after, transfer and taking over occupation, where different faults were found in the property, and has had to pay for a lot of those faults, from electrical to water issues, and really having to pay for something that you didn't budget for. So you went through finding out what transfer fees are, what the deposit is. And David and I had conversations about this when he was looking. So he was prepared and ready to pay for all of those things. But then once the property was now his, had all these other costs that he hadn't, thought he was going to have. So I think that was a different set of experience. And if anything there, it's also about knowing to look at the disclosure section of an offer to purchase and be very explicit about things that you yourself see, and even making sure that what you see is included in the offer to purchase, because you're able to then have recourse if for instance it's not addressed. Because in an offer to purchase, you're able to say, I am seeing this stamp, and it must be fixed before the matter is up for example, transfer occurs. And when the matter is at the deeds office and it's lodged and it's up for prep, the attorneys will ask, has this been addressed? And when it hasn't, you can instruct them, make sure that you do not transfer. This has not been addressed. And I've had that with a different transaction where I needed the seller to fix certain things, and only after they were fixed to my satisfaction did I then say transfer can occur, because that was a suspensive clause that we included in the offer to purchase. And I'd now like to bring on my next speaker. My next speaker is Dr. Sibile Madikana, who I also know from back at Wits, at Voice of Wits FM. So there are actually 3 Witses in this space. And I think Sibile has been a friend since back then, and I've also seen his home ownership journey and the different things that he's kind of navigated, and also not buying a property sort of first thing, even though you are young, you're a medical doctor, but rather opting to, wait a bit, or certainly buy it at a later stage. Sibu, the mic is yours, your own home ownership experience and some of the things that you wish you knew before you bought.
Hey, Zama, thank you so much. Geez, I never thought you'd get to me. But thank you for having the space, and good evening to everyone. So, as Zama said, I got my first property quite, or some would consider a bit late. Technically, I got my first apartment where I live currently last year at the age of 33. And I must say, I was not in a rush at all. And I also love, just from the conversation that we're having, it's interesting how personal each person's journey is. You would assume everyone's journey is almost the same, but it's all very different. So I was very deliberate in terms of, when I would buy, how I would buy, and what I want to buy. So as you can imagine, medical school, we're done. I started working internship. So school was like 6 years. But after that, I kind of knew the kind of things I wanted to do. So after I finished internship in community service, I wanted to go study. So I studied for an additional 4 years. I did a couple of other degrees. And the reason I didn't buy at the time when I was working as an intern, because as an intern, as a medical intern specifically, you're earning a bit more than your counterparts who are in the professional space. You earn more than CAs, more than actuaries at the time. So there was the opportunity to buy, but because I knew that I was not going to be around for a long period of time, I opted not to. So I lived with a friend of mine who's also on the space at the moment, and he gracefully allowed me to live with him. We were housemates for a number of years, and it was fantastic in that, but it was also a great living experience as well. I wanted to be prepared when I was buying my first place. So I did extensive research in terms of even the looking process, like trying to find a place. It took me probably a good 10 months, looking at different places, looking at the market and how things are looking. And then specifically what happened last year with, the COVID pandemic and the fall in the interest rates, I sort of knew that it was the right time, and also I'd wanted to also now get to a time where I also own my own space, you know. So I think for me, I was well prepared for buying my first place, and also at the time I had just moved to a new bank. You know, I've got a private banker, so they were able to negotiate even lower fees for me. I think I got it at like prime minus a couple of like basis points, and it made a huge difference. So I think one of the lessons personally that I take away from what I've done is that you must do something, you know, when it feels right to you. So not necessarily, because I know I've gotten asked over the years, you know, at 29, at 28, people are like, but why haven't you bought anything? You know, you must invest in property. And my thing was that I wanted to make sure that I find the right place at the right time and fully prepared for it. One of the things that I was also quite adamant about, as I was saying, I was living with a friend for a long period of time, and all I really owned was a bed, one couch. He had all the other things. So when I was moving out, I was very cognizant of the fact that, you know, I would move into an empty space. Therefore, I saved enough money to make sure that by the time I moved into my place, everything was finished and furnished. You know, so and even how I went around furnishing the place, I got someone to assist me with it, and essentially,
please tell us the somebody, because he's multi-talented, because I know who it is.